3 days after my daughter's wedding, her new husband arrived with a lawyer to take control of the $2 million my late husband left me. They thought they were swindling a simple, grieving clerk who knew nothing about money. They didn't know my husband had left a secret will that would give every penny to charity the moment they challenged me, or that they were fighting over the scraps of a fortune I had built myself that was 4 times larger. Before I begin, I just want to say, thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The wedding was a tasteful affair, held in the quiet, sun-dappled atrium of a small art gallery in Old City. My daughter Chloe was a vision in a simple, elegant ivory dress, her face alight with a kind of pure, unadulterated happiness I hadn't seen in her since she was a little girl. I watched from the front row, a polite, composed smile fixed on my face, a black pearl brooch, my late husband David's last gift to me, pinned over my heart. On the outside, I was the picture of a proud, if grieving, mother of the bride. On the inside, my heart was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. A genuine joy for my daughter's happiness, a profound, aching grief for the man who should have been standing beside me, and a small, cold, persistent sliver of unease. The unease had a name: Julian Vance, my new son-in-law. He stood beside my daughter, handsome and impeccably dressed, his smile as bright and polished as the city skyline. He was charming, of course, incredibly so. He had charmed Chloe from the moment they met, had charmed all her friends, and had certainly tried to charm me. But his charm felt like a performance, a well-rehearsed script. As a senior administrative clerk in the city's Department of Records for 40 years, I'd spent a lifetime looking at the fine print. I was trained to see the difference between a genuine signature and a clever forgery. And Julian's charm, to me, felt like a forgery. I watched him now as he delivered his vows, his voice thick with a practiced, perfect emotion. He spoke of destiny, of soulmates, of a love that would last an eternity. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears of pure, uncritical adoration. She was an idealist, my daughter. She worked in an art gallery, a world of beauty and ideas, and she saw the world through that same romantic, optimistic lens. She saw Julian as her Prince Charming, her ticket to a more sophisticated, exciting life than the one her practical, working-class parents had provided. She did not see, as I did, the quick, appraising glances he shot around the room, the way his eyes seemed to be calculating the net worth of the guests. My husband, David, had seen it from the very beginning. David was a master plumber, a man whose hands were calloused but whose judgment was as clear and true as a level line. That boy's a salesman, Sarah. He had told me a month before the heart attack took him from me. And he's selling a product I don't trust. He looks at our Chloe like she's a winning lottery ticket. I had tried to dismiss it as a father's overprotectiveness. But now, standing here alone, I felt the cold truth of his words. I was the grieving widow, a role I was still learning to inhabit. But to Julian, I was something else entirely. I was the sole heir to my husband's estate, the keeper of the lottery ticket he believed his new wife was about to cash in. And the polite, almost pitying deference he showed me felt less like respect for my grief and more like the careful, patient handling of a fragile, valuable asset. What Julian didn't know, what even my own daughter didn't fully comprehend, was that the lottery ticket was far more complex than they could ever imagine. And I was not just its keeper, I was its co-author. For 40 years, our life was a quiet, powerful partnership. David was the face of the business, the master of his trade, a man who built a plumbing and contracting company that was the gold standard in Philadelphia. He was the one on the job sites, the one whose name was on the side of the truck. I, on the other hand, was the silent partner, the architect of our financial security. My official title was Senior Administrative Clerk for the city's Department of Records. To my daughter, it was a boring, dusty job, a world of paper pushing and bureaucracy. She had no idea that my 40 years in that office had given me a PhD in the real world of money. I understood contracts. I understood deeds. I understood the fine print where the real power always lies. Every Friday, for 40 years, David would come home and place his earnings for the week on our kitchen table in our comfortable, paid-for Victorian home in West Mount Airy. We would sit together, under the warm light of the kitchen lamp, and we would go over the numbers. This was our ritual, our board meeting. He was the head of operations. I was the chief financial officer. I managed the books. I paid the bills. And, most importantly, I invested. With the meticulous, patient discipline of a clerk filing away deeds, I took every spare dollar and I put it to work. I started small, with simple mutual funds and bonds. But I learned. I read. I studied the market with the same intensity I applied to city zoning codes. I learned to see the patterns, to understand the risks, to recognize the opportunities. While Chloe was studying art history, I was studying quarterly earnings reports. While she was learning about the Impressionists, I was learning about dividend reinvestment plans. I built a portfolio slowly, quietly, and methodically. A secret garden of wealth that no one, not even Chloe, knew existed. David trusted me completely. "You handle the paper, Sarah," he would say. "I'll handle the pipes." The result was a quiet, unshowy, and deeply substantial fortune. Part of it was the business itself, the tangible assets and the goodwill of my husband's name. But a significant, and growing, part of it was my own creation, a testament to 40 years of disciplined, intelligent investing. I was not a simple clerk. I was a financial powerhouse, hiding in plain sight. And my late husband, a man who valued my intelligence above all else, had made sure that our final act as a partnership would be a testament to that truth. He had seen Julian coming. And together, in these quiet kitchen table meetings, we had prepared for him. The day after the wedding, I sat in the quiet, wood-paneled office of Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne had been David's lawyer and best friend since they were boys growing up in North Philly. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man with a deep, abiding loyalty to my late husband's memory. And to me, it was a beautiful wedding, Sarah, he said, his voice a gentle, comforting rumble. Chloe looked happy. "She is," I said. "She's very much in love." With the boy or with the idea of him?" he asked, his eyes sharp over the top of his reading glasses. I gave him a small, weary smile. "I'm not sure she knows the difference." He nodded, a grim understanding passing between us. He, too, had seen the forgery. He slid a thick, formal document across his polished desk. "Well," he said, his voice all business now. "David was very clear in his instructions. The will is simple, as you know." I knew. David and I had gone over it with him a dozen times, especially in the last few years, as Julian's presence in our lives became more permanent. The will was, on its surface, exactly what anyone would expect. It named me, Sarah Jenkins, his wife of 42 years, as the sole and primary beneficiary of his entire estate. It detailed the assets, the house in West Mount Airy, the business, the personal savings and investment accounts. The total value of the estate, as calculated for probate, was just over $2 million. A substantial sum, the result of a lifetime of hard work. "Everything is straightforward," Mr. Thorne said. "The business assets will be valued for sale, the accounts will be transferred to your name. It will take a few months to settle everything, but legally, it's all yours." I nodded. This was the first act of the play, the part of the story that was public knowledge. This was the bait. I was now, officially, a widow with a $2 million inheritance. A simple, grieving, and supposedly unsophisticated clerk who had just been handed a fortune she had no idea how to manage. I was, in the eyes of my new son-in-law, the perfect mark. As I was leaving his office, Mr. Thorne put a gentle hand on my arm. "He was a smart man, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "He saw this coming. He made sure you were protected. You just remember that." I knew what he meant. He was reminding me of the second act, of the secret, hidden part of the will that no one else knew about, the part that was designed to protect me from the very situation my husband had so accurately predicted. I walked out of the law office and into the bright Philadelphia sunshine, the weight of the $2 million estate feeling less like a comfort and more like a target on my back. Chloe and Julian went to Italy for their honeymoon, a lavish, 2-week affair that I knew was far beyond their means. I spent those 2 weeks in a quiet state of grief and preparation. I mourned my husband. I missed the simple, easy comfort of his presence. But I also began, with a cold, methodical clarity, to get my own affairs in order. I met with my personal financial advisor. I reviewed my own, separate portfolio. I prepared for the storm I knew was coming. The first thunderclap arrived 3 days after they returned, while the scent of Italian leather from their new luggage still lingered in the air. It came in the form of a crisp, formal, and deeply intimidating letter, delivered by courier. The letterhead was from a high-powered, unfamiliar law firm in Center City. The letter was addressed to me, but it was clearly written by Julian. It was a masterpiece of aggressive, condescending legalese, a document designed to terrify a simple clerk into submission. It began by offering sincere condolences on my loss. It then quickly pivoted to the matter of the estate. It spoke of Chloe's natural and understandable concern for her late father's legacy. It mentioned the complexities of managing a multi-million-dollar estate and the fiduciary duties required to protect its value. And then came the core of the message. The veiled threat wrapped in the language of concern. Given the significant value of the estate and your own stated lack of experience in high-level financial management, it read, "Our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, feel it is imperative that a more formal, professionally managed structure be put in place to safeguard these assets for the long-term benefit of the family. To that end, we would like to request a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the formation of a trust, to be managed by a qualified financial professional, to ensure the prudent and effective stewardship of the Jenkins family legacy." I read the letter twice, a cold, calm anger settling in my heart. The honeymoon was well and truly over. It had taken my new son-in-law less than a month to make his move. He was not just trying to get his hands on the money. He was trying to legally strip me of my own agency, to have me declared incompetent, a foolish old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own inheritance. He had made his first, critical, and catastrophic mistake. He had put his demand in writing, and he had, in doing so, officially triggered the very clause my husband had so brilliantly designed to protect me. The game had begun. I called Mr. Thorne the moment I finished reading the letter. "They've made their move," I said, my voice a flat, emotionless line. I heard a low, grim chuckle on the other end of the line. "Right on schedule," he said. David knew that boy was a piranha. He just didn't know he'd start biting so soon. "Don't you worry, Sarah. We're ready for this. I'll respond to their letter and accept the meeting." The meeting was set for the following week. Julian, in a classic power play, insisted it be held at his lawyer's office, not Mr. Thorne's. It was a deliberate choice, designed to put us on the defensive, to make us come to his territory. I walked into the conference room of the downtown law firm feeling not like a victim, but like a general entering a parley, knowing I had the superior forces hidden just over the hill. The room was a sterile, impersonal space of glass and chrome, a world away from the warm, wood-paneled comfort of Mr. Thorne's office. Julian and Chloe were already seated at the long, glass table. Julian was the picture of confident, concerned professionalism, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car. He stood up as we entered, his smile smooth and solicitous. "Sarah," he said, using my first name with a practiced familiarity, "thank you for coming. We know this is difficult, but we really feel it's for the best." Chloe sat beside him, looking nervous but resolute. She was dressed in a severe, dark dress, her face arranged in a mask of somber concern. She was playing the part of the devoted daughter, worried about her fragile, grieving mother. She avoided my eyes. Their lawyer, a slick, aggressive-looking man with a predatory smile, introduced himself and gestured for us to sit. The ambush was set. They had us outnumbered, in their territory, and they believed they held all the cards. Mr. Thorne and I sat opposite them, a quiet, two-person island of calm in their sea of manufactured concern. The contrast was stark. They were all sharp angles and aggressive postures. We were still, and we were patient. We let them make the first move. Julian's lawyer began the proceedings. He spoke in a smooth, condescending tone, as if explaining a complex concept to a small child. He spoke of the importance of legacy planning, of asset protection, of ensuring David Jenkins's lifetime of hard work was not squandered. Our clients, he said, gesturing to Julian and Chloe, have a deep and abiding respect for you, Sarah. And it is out of that respect that they have proposed a solution that will provide you with complete security for the rest of your life, while also ensuring the long-term growth and preservation of the estate. He then laid out their demand. It was even more audacious than the letter had suggested. They proposed the creation of the Jenkins Family Trust. The entirety of David's $2 million estate would be placed into this trust. The trustee, the person with sole and absolute control over all investment decisions, would be Julian Vance, a qualified financial professional. And what, Mr. Thorne asked, his voice a quiet, dangerous rumble, would be my client's role in this arrangement? Mrs. Jenkins, the lawyer said, turning his predatory smile on me, would be the trust's primary beneficiary, of course. She would be provided with a generous monthly stipend, enough to cover all her living expenses, for the rest of her natural life. She wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Julian would handle all the complex financial decisions, ensuring the money is managed wisely and grows for future generations. It was a cage, a beautiful gilded cage. They were offering to put me on an allowance, to turn me into a dependent, a pensioner living off the scraps of my own fortune, while Julian used the bulk of our life savings as his personal investment fund. They were not just trying to control the money, they were trying to control me. Julian then spoke, his voice a masterpiece of feigned sincerity. Sarah, I know this is a lot to take in, he said, leaning forward, his expression one of deep, earnest concern. But I am an expert in this field. I can make that $2 million grow into 5, into 10. I can build a real dynasty with it. A legacy for Chloe, and for our future children. This is about protecting the family. It's about protecting you from the stress and the burden of managing such a large sum. He was framing his greed as a generous, protective act. He was painting me as a simple, fragile woman who needed to be rescued from the overwhelming complexity of her own wealth. It was the most profoundly insulting moment of my life. I sat in silence, absorbing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their proposal. I looked across the table at my daughter. She had been quiet throughout the presentation, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on her new husband with a look of unwavering, almost worshipful, support. Now she turned to me. Her expression was one of pained, heartfelt sincerity, a performance she had clearly rehearsed with Julian. Mom, she said, her voice soft and pleading, I know this is hard to hear. But Julian is right. This is for the best. For all of us. She reached across the table, as if to take my hand, but I did not offer it. She let her own hand rest on the cold, glass surface between us. You've worked your whole life, Mom, she continued, her voice thick with a false, sentimental emotion. You and Dad. You deserve to rest. You shouldn't have to worry about stock markets and investments. You've never had to handle this kind of money before. It's a huge burden. Let Julian take care of it. He knows this world. He can protect us. He can protect what Dad built. The words, so full of a loving, daughterly concern, were a series of small, sharp, and deeply personal betrayals. You've never had to handle this kind of money. A direct, dismissive erasure of my 40 years as the silent, successful CFO of our family. It's a huge burden, framing my own financial independence as a source of stress from which I needed to be rescued. But it was her final sentence that truly broke my heart. It's what Dad would have wanted, she said, her voice a near whisper, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. That was it. The final, unforgivable betrayal. She was using the memory of her father, a man who had seen through Julian from the very beginning, a man who had spent his final months working with Mr. Thorne to protect me from this exact scenario, as a weapon against me. She was invoking his name to justify her own greedy, grasping attempt to steal my inheritance. In that moment, any lingering hope I had for my daughter, any belief that she was simply a naive, idealistic girl being manipulated by a predator, vanished. She was not a victim. She was a willing, active accomplice. She had chosen her new husband, and the promise of a life of sophisticated wealth he represented, over her own mother, over the truth of her own father's legacy. I looked at her, at this stranger sitting across from me, and the last vestiges of my grief were burned away by a cold, hard, and utterly clarifying anger. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for action had arrived. I turned to my lawyer, Mr. Thorne, and I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal we had agreed upon. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. It was time to spring it. Mr. Thorne, who had been listening to the entire presentation with a look of stony, impassive neutrality, leaned forward. The shift in his posture was subtle, but it commanded the attention of the entire room. "Thank you, Mr. Vance, for that comprehensive presentation," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "And thank you, Chloe, for sharing your thoughts on your father's intentions." He paused, letting the silence in the room stretch to an uncomfortable length. Julian and his lawyer exchanged a small, confident smile. They believed they had won. They believed our silence was a prelude to a negotiation, a surrender. "We have considered your proposal," Mr. Thorne continued, his eyes, as sharp and cold as a winter morning, moving from Julian to his lawyer. "And we reject it. In its entirety." The confident smiles on their faces vanished. Julian's jaw tightened. "I beg your pardon?" his lawyer said, his voice dripping with offended pride. "There is no need to beg, Mr. Thorne replied smoothly. "The proposal is insulting, predatory, and based on a series of fundamentally false assumptions about my client's financial acumen and her late husband's wishes. It is not a starting point for a negotiation. It is a non-starter. So it is rejected." "Pa!" Chloe gasped, a small, wounded sound. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. They were not accustomed to being told no. "However," Mr. Thorne continued, his voice taking on a new, almost cheerful tone, "in the interest of bringing this matter to a swift and final conclusion, my client, Mrs. Jenkins, has instructed me to present a counter-proposal of her own." This was unexpected. They had prepared for a fight, for an argument, for a negotiation. They had not prepared for a counteroffer. A flicker of interest, of greed, appeared in Julian's eyes. Perhaps there was still a deal to be made. "We're listening," he said, his voice a tight, controlled thing. "Excellent," Mr. Thorne said. He reached into his handsome, well-worn leather briefcase and retrieved a single, sealed, manila envelope. It was not a thick, intimidating legal document. It was a simple, standard envelope. He placed it on the glass table in the center of the room. "My client's counterproposal," he announced, "is contained within this envelope. It is, I believe you will find, a far more accurate reflection of Mr. David Jenkins's true and final wishes for the disposition of his estate and the protection of his beloved wife." He did not open it. He simply let it sit there, a silent, powerful challenge. The entire dynamic of the room had been reversed. We were no longer the ones being ambushed. We were the ones who had just laid the trap, and they, in their arrogance, were about to be forced to spring it themselves. Julian stared at the manila envelope as if it were a bomb. His mind, which was quick and strategic, was clearly trying to calculate the angles, to anticipate the move. What could be in there? A revised offer? A smaller trust? A one-time cash settlement? "What is this, Thorne?" his lawyer demanded, his voice full of bluster. "Some kind of theatrical stunt. The will was clear. The estate passes to Mrs. Jenkins. That is the legal reality." "You are correct, Mr. Thorne agreed politely. "The will we read last week is a perfectly legal and valid document. However, it is not the only legal and valid document." He looked at Julian, a small, pitying smile on his face. "You see, Mr. Vance, my late friend David Jenkins was a plumber. He spent his life dealing with pipes. And he knew that even the strongest pipe can spring a leak if it's put under the wrong kind of pressure. He was a prudent man. He believed in having a backup system. And Mr. Thorne then gestured to the envelope. "That," he announced to the silent, stunned room, "is the backup system." David, being a man of great foresight, and having, let's say, reservations, about his daughter's choice of husband, had me draft a second will a week before his death. A conditional will. It was to be held in my safe, sealed and unread, and was to be executed only under a very specific set of circumstances. Chloe, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice a trembling mixture of confusion and fear. A second will? That's not legal. Oh, it is perfectly legal, my dear, Mr. Thorne said, his voice gentle but firm. It is structured as a codicil, a superseding amendment to the original will. And the condition for its execution, well, the condition was you. He looked from Chloe's pale face to Julian's. The condition was that if you, Chloe, or any person acting on your behalf, such as your new husband, ever made a formal, legal attempt to contest my client's inheritance, or to otherwise gain control of the estate against her wishes, the first will would be immediately rendered null and void, and the second will, the one in this envelope, would become the final and binding testament of David Jenkins. The trap was now fully revealed. Their own aggressive, predatory letter, their ambush meeting, their insulting demand, it was not just a failed business proposal. It was the legal trigger. They had, with their own hands, activated the backup system. They had sprung the trap on themselves. Julian's face was a mask of disbelief. "You're bluffing," he hissed. "Am I?" Mr. Thorne replied, his voice a silken challenge. He picked up the envelope. "There is a very simple way to find out." He tore open the seal. The sound of the paper ripping was the only sound in the room, a sound of profound and irreversible finality. The backup system was now online. Mr. Thorne pulled a single, folded sheet of paper from the envelope. It was the codicil, the legal instrument that was about to detonate the entire proceeding. He unfolded it with a slow, deliberate care, smoothing it out on the glass table. "This document," he began, his voice taking on the formal sonorous tone of a court clerk reading a verdict, "is the first codicil to the last will and testament of David R. Jenkins. It is signed by Mr. Jenkins and witnessed by myself and my senior partner. It is, I assure you, ironclad." He put on his reading glasses and looked down at the page. "The preamble is standard, so I will skip to the relevant section. Article 1, which I have taken the liberty of naming the loyalty clause." He looked up, over the top of his glasses, his gaze locking with Chloe's. "Your father was a man who valued loyalty above all else, Chloe," he said, his voice now gentle, almost sad. "He loved you dearly, but he loved your mother more, and his primary, overriding wish was to ensure that she would be safe, secure, and respected for the rest of her life. This clause was his insurance policy on that wish." He looked back down at the document and began to read. "It is my primary and non-negotiable desire that my beloved wife, Sarah Jenkins, be the sole and undisputed beneficiary of my entire estate, to manage and enjoy as she, in her infinite wisdom, sees fit. I have the utmost faith in her character and her financial acumen." He paused, letting the first sentence, a direct refutation of their entire argument, sink in. He continued, "However, in the event that my daughter, Chloe Jenkins, or her spouse, or any legal representative acting on their behalf, should ever, after my death, initiate any formal legal action, or make any formal legal demand, with the intent of contesting my wife's inheritance, or of gaining control over the management of my estate against my wife's express wishes, such an action shall be deemed an act of profound disloyalty and a direct violation of my final wishes." He looked up again. "The letter you sent, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice as cold as steel, "and the proposal you have made here today are, without question, a formal legal demand with the intent of gaining control over the estate. You have, by your own actions, triggered this clause." Julian's lawyer, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice a weak, sputtering protest. This is highly irregular. A clause like that might not be enforceable." "Oh, it is perfectly enforceable," Mr. Thorne replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. "It is a standard interim clause, and it is rock solid. But please feel free to challenge it. My firm's litigation department would be delighted to bill you for the experience. Now, if I may continue?" He looked back down at the page, at the final devastating sentence of the loyalty clause. He read it with a slow, deliberate, and almost mournful finality. In the event that this loyalty clause is triggered, the entirety of the original will, including the primary bequest to my wife, Sarah Jenkins, shall be rendered null and void. The disposition of my estate shall then be governed, in its entirety, by the terms of the following and final article. The room was a vacuum of stunned, horrified silence. They had not just lost their bid to control the money. They had, in their greed, vaporized the very will that had granted it to me in the first place. The $2 million estate was now a ghost, a phantom fortune that had just been erased by their own actions. And the question of where it would go now hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The air in the conference room was thick with the wreckage of my daughter's expectations. Chloe was staring at Mr. Thorne, her face a mask of pale, slack-jawed disbelief. Julian's confident, predatory smirk had been wiped clean, replaced by the stunned, vacant expression of a gambler who has just pushed all his chips into the center of the table and lost on the final card. Mr. Thorne, with the grim, solemn air of a funeral director, turned to the final article of the codicil. This was it. The final disposition. The true inheritance. Article 2, he announced, his voice a low, steady finality. The final bequest of David R. Jenkins. He began to read. In the event that the loyalty clause, as detailed in Article 1, has been triggered, it is my final and irrevocable will that the entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $2 million, shall be used to honor the trade that gave me and my family a good and honorable life. He paused, letting the words settle. I hereby direct my executor, Marcus Thorne, to liquidate all assets of my estate, and to use the full proceeds to establish the David R. Jenkins Memorial Scholarship Fund at the Philadelphia Community College's Plumbing and Trade Certification Program. This fund shall provide full, annual scholarships and tool grants to promising, hardworking young men and women who wish to pursue a career as a master plumber. It is my wish that my life's work be used not to fund a life of leisure, but to build a new generation of skilled, proud tradespeople who will, as I did, build this city with their own two hands. The words were a posthumous testament to the man my husband was. He was not just disinheriting his ungrateful daughter, he was taking the fortune she had tried to steal and reinvesting it in the values she had so profoundly rejected. He was honoring the working-class roots she was so ashamed of. It was a final, devastating, and deeply poetic act of paternal judgment. The $2 million estate was gone. It had not been transferred to me. It had been bequeathed to a legion of future plumbers. Julian's lawyer finally found his voice. So the estate, it's all gone? He stammered. There's nothing left for either party? That is correct, Mr. Thorne said. The estate, as defined by the will, has been redirected. There is nothing left to inherit. Ho! Julian let out a strangled, incredulous laugh. So you get nothing either, he said, looking at me with a wild, desperate triumph in his eyes. You played your big, clever game, and you lost too. You're just as broke as we are. It was the last, desperate gambit of a defeated man, trying to find a sliver of victory in the ashes of his own ruin. He still believed we were playing the same game. He still believed we were fighting over the same, $2 million prize. He had no idea that the game he had just lost was merely the preliminary round, and that I had not even begun to play my own hand. I had been silent throughout the entire proceeding, a quiet, observant spectator at the dismantling of my own inheritance. Now, for the first time, I spoke. You are mistaken, Julian, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying a new, unfamiliar weight of authority. All eyes in the room turned to me. I looked at my daughter, at her pale, tear-streaked face. Chloe, I said, my voice gentle, but firm. You have spent your entire adult life being ashamed of your parents, ashamed of your father's trade, ashamed of my simple job. You believed we were simple people, with a simple, lucky fortune. I then turned my gaze to Julian. And you, Julian, you saw us as an easy mark, a grieving, unsophisticated widow and her naive, idealistic daughter. You saw a $2 million pot of gold and you thought you could simply take it. I let the truth of my words settle in the silent room. You were both wrong, I said. I then looked at Mr. Thorne and gave him a small, final nod. Mr. Thorne reached into his briefcase one last time. He pulled out not a legal document, but a thick, professionally bound financial portfolio. He slid it across the table. It came to a stop in front of Julian. "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice a weary, defeated whisper. "That, Mr. Vance, Mr. Thorne said, a note of profound, triumphant satisfaction in his voice, "is the reason my client was never particularly concerned about the disposition of her husband's $2 million estate. That is a summary of Mrs. Sarah Jenkins's personal investment portfolio. The one she has been managing herself for the past 40 years. Julian opened the portfolio. His lawyer and Chloe leaned in to look, and I watched as the final, devastating truth landed on them. The portfolio was a testament to a lifetime of quiet, brilliant financial stewardship. It was a diversified collection of blue-chip stocks, real estate holdings, and municipal bonds. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of long-term, disciplined investing. And at the bottom of the summary page was the final tally, the current, total value of my personal, secret fortune. The number was just over $7 million. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having gone off, a silence filled with the ringing of their own shattered assumptions. I was not the simple, grieving clerk. I was a financial powerhouse, a quiet, self-made multimillionaire who was nearly 4 times wealthier than the estate they had just so foolishly and greedily fought over. "As you can see, Mr. Thorne said, his voice a cool, final judgment, "my client is not, and has never been, in need of a financial manager. It seems, in fact, that you might have benefited from her advice." The humiliation was complete. They had not just lost the inheritance, they had been exposed as fools. They had tried to swindle a woman who was not only morally superior, but vastly, staggerably, wealthier than they could have ever imagined. I stood up. The meeting was over. My business here was done. "Chloe," I said, looking at my daughter, who was staring at the $7 million number as if it were a phantom. "Your father was a good man. He loved you. But he saw the truth of your character, and the character of the man you chose. His final will was not an act of anger. It was an act of profound and heartbreaking clarity. He did not want his life's work to be squandered by your materialism and your husband's greed. He wanted it to mean something." I walked to the door. Mr. Thorne gathered his papers and followed me. "I wish you both the best of luck," I said, my voice devoid of all sarcasm. "You are going to need it." I walked out of the conference room, out of the law firm, and into the bright, clear light of the Philadelphia afternoon. I felt no triumph. I felt only a great, weary, and profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. The aftermath was quiet, and it was absolute. Chloe and Julian's marriage, a union built on a foundation of financial expectation, did not survive the revelation. They separated within 6 months. Julian, his reputation as a financial wizard in tatters, was left with nothing but the bill for his own lawyer. Chloe, for the first time in her life, was forced to live on her own salary. The life of art galleries and sophisticated ideals was suddenly confronted with the harsh reality of rent payments and utility bills. She was forced to sell her expensive car and move into a small apartment she could actually afford. She was, at long last, living the life of a person who had to work for a living. And me? I honored my husband's legacy. I attended the first awards ceremony for the David Jenkins Memorial Scholarship. I stood on a small stage at the community college and I handed a large, life-changing check to a bright, deserving, and deeply grateful young woman who was the first in her family to enter a skilled trade. She was a plumber, and she was the true heir to my husband's fortune. I have not spoken to my daughter. Perhaps one day, if she ever truly understands the lesson her father tried to teach her, she will call. And perhaps I will answer. But for now, I am content in my quiet, comfortable life. I am Sarah Jenkins. I am a retired clerk. I am a savvy investor. I am a philanthropist. And I am, for the first time in a very long time, completely and peacefully my own woman.